evening and welcome to another convening of The Conversation. The show is here to stimulate wide and diverse discussions on the many topics that are of national importance. This nationally televised show will dive into many issues and will not shy away from the truly sensitive ones that we have avoided for far too long. So we are offering this platform to have the conversation. I am your host, Carla Barnett. One topic that continues to generate a lot of interest and controversy is the legalization of marijuana. Those in favor of legalizing recreational marijuana in Belize say it will add millions to the economy, create hundreds of jobs, free up scarce police resources, and stop the big disparities in marijuana enforcement. They contend that marijuana is less harmful than alcohol, and that adults should have a right to use it if they wish. Opponents of legalizing recreational marijuana say that it will increase teen use and lead to more medical emergencies, including traffic accidents from driving while high. They argue that revenue from legalization will not justify the costs in increased hospital visits, addiction treatment, and lost productivity. They say that marijuana use harms the user physically and mentally, and that its use should be strongly discouraged, not legalized. We asked some Belizeans to give their opinions on this topic. Here is what they said.
Do you think smoking marijuana is okay?
Yes, I think it's okay because it's a plant that God created. So I think if they legalize alcohol, then legalize a plant that God has created for us to do what we want to do with it.
Yes, because everybody smoke it and things, so I don't think it's bad for people. Yes, I believe it's okay. I don't see anything wrong with it.
Very okay. It's one of the best and healthiest way.
Do you, any close family member or a friend, use marijuana recreationally?
Yes, Mom. I grew up with marijuana. My pa was a smoker, If I could have smoked it, I smoke it, but I have side effects, so I don't smoke it, but I have no problem with marijuana.
Yes, I do have family and friends that do. You could do anything in your spare time, so I don't see anything wrong with that.
Just friends. No family member that I know of, and I personally know, but I know of friends that do, yes.
For me, it's a private thing. It's not something that I would like to share with everybody. But to tell you the truth, it is one of the industry that I am very interested in. So yes, it's something that we should celebrate to have the freedom of recreational smoking if that is possible.
What difference has the decriminalization in 2017 made in your life or anybody around you?
Well, the difference is you don't have the police harassing people for the small quantity like before. They are more free to move around and buy a small quantity instead of getting arrested and go to his house, for just a small quantity that has been legalized.
Well, I do see that they aren't being attacked as much, and they get to enjoy a certain amount, so that's good too.
Well, for sure, I have a little bit of privacy. I have a little bit more relaxation. They have the word paranoid. There's no paranoia. It somehow makes the point better to have decriminalization and relaxation in the same conversation.
Do you think Belize should go ahead and legalize marijuana?
Yes, I think they should. Why? Because it's a plant that God has created. We as humans have no right to determine what God has put on this planet, and we have no right to determine what it should be used for or not. It's free, it's from God, it's from the Creator.
Yes, so they could stop harass people every minute. Yes, I believe Belize should. It happened in other countries and states, so yeah, and it's good use for medicinal purposes as well, so yeah, they should.
I don't think we should legalize marijuana. It won't benefit us in any way. A lot of countries will withdraw from us. That's my opinion.
I want to be the mascot of marijuana smoking. I want to be on the billboard of marijuana advertising. I want to be the king of marijuana in Belize because it is nothing to be ashamed of. Marijuana is making billions of dollars all over the world. And if I could get my face on something like that, I think that there is value behind the industry, and I wish that Belizeans like myself, who is very passionate about this, could benefit from it. So go right ahead, 100%, but leave the door open for people like me to have my face as the king of marijuana industry in Belize.
There you have it. From the very small sampling, we see that most of those interviewed are in support of legalizing marijuana. We will endeavor to conduct a proper polling on this issue at some point. But for now, our first guest tonight brings a diverse perspective on this issue. Doug Singh was a former Minister of Police in Belize, and subsequently, he also served as the chairman of the Decriminalization of Marijuana Committee. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carla. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, absolutely. It's our pleasure to have you. When you were Minister of Police, what did you observe that made you later support the efforts to decriminalize small quantities of marijuana?
Carla, to be honest, it was probably most of the injustices. I had a very difficult time, I think, in the position when people are calling you up and wondering they have a criminal record. And it's a small matter of maybe being arrested for marijuana, and it's there. They apply for a visa, it's reported, and they don't receive the visa. You have young kids who want to go to college, can't get, these things hold them back. And I just thought that this was not the right thing. And the whole society and the view on it was changing, and perhaps this is the time that we had this conversation. But I think principal among them, though, was, or poor Belizeans who participated in this and were harassed and were being arrested and were being held in jail for these petty matters. And so for me, that is an injustice, and that was something that had to have been dealt with.
What was the process like trying to convince the public, convince interest groups and policymakers to support the decriminalization bill?
It was challenging at the beginning, especially with the churches and in particular with the teachers' union. I remember we met with the teachers' union at their office, and it was a meeting that pretty much put it into perspective relative to what their position were. And I know that they had some difficult times with kids coming to school and with some of the incidents that some young people got in. Some young people were used for carriers for adults to supply. And they gave you the examples that, you know, they may not have been taking it themselves, but it was disrupting in their lives because they were participating in the trade.
In the trade, okay.
And,
they were the carry people, yeah.
And then the churches, on the other hand, had different perspective.
Right.
I think we succeeded in convincing most of the head of the structured religion, when I say structured, the organized, larger ones. And I think ultimately they did not resist. Maybe support would be a large word, and I wouldn't want to get into trouble to say that the churches supported it. There were elements of the churches that didn't.
That did not support, yes. There were some very vocal.
The evangelical group. But I think what benefited us is the process took a while, a lot longer than I expected. And I think the entire international conversation changed.
Right.
And so you started seeing what was happening in Canada, in Jamaica, in the United States, in Mexico, in South America, in Europe. And people started paying attention.
Right.
And I think they started taking a different view of it. And ultimately, we had far less resistance as a result of that. So I think the international, the timing perhaps was important. And I think if we had pushed earlier, we may not have succeeded with the initiative.
Right.
But the time, it took its own proper course. And at the end of the day, I think presented a reasonable point of view.
And the period of time for consultation, you talked with people and talked and talked and listened and exchanged views. And
we did a lot of
that. So you were
that.
able to come to a midpoint.
Indeed. And we had some interesting people on the panel, and we had different members from different walks of life that we interviewed to get their perspective on it. It is important that you just don't have one perspective. We actually had people write in, and you can put it in piles as to those who support and those who didn't support. So it was very interesting.
Okay, now that it is decriminalized in small quantities, and I have to emphasize that it is in small quantities, just 10 grams, do you know if there was a specific provision for expunging criminal records, or if that was contemplated when the bill was drafted?
Well, yes, but it was done in two different ways. When I was minister, because of many complaints that individuals had with criminal records for very small matters, I took an initiative to cabinet and it was approved and it was passed and it was just an SI that was needed to amend it. But what we did is we allowed for the expunging after 2 years, I believe it was, for summary jurisdiction matters. And possession of marijuana and some of those things fell under summary jurisdiction matters. So there was a whole slew of items, I think it was like 190 something different infraction that was actually, that allowed for the records to be expunged, and it was done. Initially, it was contemplated that individuals would apply for it to be expunged, but there was a data analyst at the police, at the ministry, and the data analyst found a way to just go in and take all of these things and actually remove them. So that was the first initiative. The second one, in the passing of the legislation, provided for the correction of those who had records between the expungement and thereafter for it to be removed. And of course, if you're in possession for 10 grams and less, you cannot get a criminal record under the existing legislation.
Right. So it would have to be before the legislation came into effect. You would have to apply to get it removed from your record.
That was the principle, but we did it automatically at the ministry. Some creative IT person found a way to do it. So it became unnecessary to have all these people call in.
Okay, the reason why I ask is because I know that there were a couple of instances in which young men needed to get their records cleared, and they were advised that they needed to apply to get it done. And this would have been in the last 2 years or so. And so it's not such an automatic process.
It should have been, but I was told it was. So if that's the case, I don't know if it's misinformation or in fact not all of it was done, but I know there was an initiative to do so.
Okay. The decriminalization of small quantities of marijuana has been in effect since November 2017. We spoke with the CEO of Colby Foundation to see what changes have occurred since then. Let's take a look.
Colby Foundation is the organization. It is a non-profit, non-governmental organization that has the contract to manage the prison system for the country of Belize. So when we talk about the facilities, the facility should be referred to as the Belize Central Prison. So that is the facility. And when I say the Belize Central Prison, it means the youth facility, or it means where the youths are kept. We have women prisoners in prison, and we have adult males. So the facility is called the Belize Central Prison.
How has the decriminalization of small quantities of marijuana impacted the incarceration rate at Colby?
It has reduced the incarceration for this particular offense by an overall 65% when I look at my inmate population and incarceration over the last 6 years.
Can you tell us the age range of the population at Colby who are generally locked up for marijuana possessions?
All right. It is always between the ages of 18 and 25 years old.
What percentage of the inmates at Colby Foundation are there on drug-related charges?
All right. I see, based on my current population, I see a 5.5% of the inmates being in prison for either drug trafficking or drug possession. I want to tell you, though, if you put a number to that, the prison population is 1,059 right now, and there's literally only 59 persons in prison currently who are there for drug-related offenses. 42 of them, or 4% of that 5.5% I quoted earlier, are there for drug trafficking, which means a share 1%, 1.5% thereabout is in there for drug possession.
Would you support graduating from decriminalization to legalization of medical and recreational marijuana? Why or why not?
All right. I am certainly not a proponent of drug use nor drug abuse, because being in the prison business for the last 19 years, I am fully aware that it is that drugs is addictive in nature, and I know fully well that criminal behavior has its roots in drug use or drug abuse, however you want to put it. There are people who commit crime to use drugs. There are those also who use drugs to commit crime. And in cases, there are people who are a combination of both. So any addiction, to my mind, has a financial cost which negatively impacts the addict, their family, and the society at large. So to me, it is really an outright loss in just every aspect of the word lost.
Those are some significant statistics when we listen to the reduction in incarceration because of the decriminalization of small quantities. That is good news for those who are in support of legalizing small quantities, but the big concerns still remain. What is your take, Doug, on the concern that legalization will increase teen usage?
Well, I think that it ought to be a concern, whether real or otherwise. Medical evidence has shown that developing brain is affected negatively by the use of any drugs, marijuana included. So it may mean that the person may not be as motivated, they may not learn at the same rate. So it's a concern. But I don't think it ought to be treated any differently from alcohol, meaning that legalization of marijuana, to me, ought not to mean that teenagers should be able to go out and get it. Just like how alcohol is legal, but teenagers don't have the legal right
to go and
it's regulated. It's regulated.
Right.
So, so you've had something that also has a negative effect on teenagers, and you have legislation in place to actually provide for that. And there is penalties not only on the part of the person using, but on the part of the person selling, distributing.
Providing,
also. So for me, I think if it is treated as a drug, as a recreational drug, it ought to have the same level of legal protection or legal regulations around it to provide for the protection of young people.
Of young people, absolutely. What about the belief that social and economic costs for addiction treatment, traffic accidents, medical treatment, those kinds of things will outweigh the economic boost of legalizing marijuana?
Well, I can see an argument can be made for that, but not if legalization comes with all the bells and whistles that it shows. For example, taxation, which is where it's gone in most, if not all, developed countries, or anybody who has done so. The argument for it is you're always going to have the ills, but you won't have the resources to deal with it. If you legalize and you legislate and you tax it accordingly, then you will have a kitty, you will have monies that you can actually use to address these things.
Right.
So you can have better treatment centers, better funded treatment centers, better facilities, better education programs to go to an aversion, in particular in early education.
Right.
So for me, I don't necessarily think that the statement that was made is justified when you look at the wider picture.
Okay.
The wider picture says that if you recognize that it's a problem, but you put things in place that allow you to deal with that problem, like some of the Scandinavian countries.
That's what I was thinking.
The Netherlands.
Right.
The Netherlands recognize it.
Portugal has legalized and now focus on
treatment.
Addiction treatment, because people will use drugs whether they are legal or illegal.
And collect revenues from it that help to fund those kind of exercises. It creates opportunities, I think, for everybody all the way around, and it puts a better enabling environment to deal with some of the problems. So I think it's a double-sided thing, but I don't believe I completely buy the argument that there would be more ills. On the issue of driving, it was interesting because when we did the research, Canada had gone down the exercise from 19, I think it was 2000 or 2001, and that was one of the questions: does smoking marijuana impair your driving? And they said, yes, it does, but it makes you drive slower. So I thought that was interesting, meaning that so
all right.
Probably, I don't know if that means that you're less likely to get into an accident.
I guess the concern is about perception, and I don't know, but people instinctively assume that anything that changes how the brain perceives things would be dangerous. But alcohol is the most by far the drug, because it is a drug that impairs one's driving, and it's a legal drug.
And has contributed to a tremendous amount of tragic accidents.
Absolutely, and loss of lives. And
I don't know that there's a lot of evidence that marijuana has done so.
I don't want to say yes or no because I don't know, but I always advocate that people get the information. But everybody I've asked have said the same thing, that it doesn't affect your driving.
Well, I
but
think
then people will say that.
I don't know that the police department at the time of drug tests, or at the time this happens, tests too much for marijuana anyway. So even if it is doing so, the data probably doesn't exist in any meaningful way.
Right, right. What about the belief that it is delusional to think that legalizing the sale and distribution of marijuana will get rid of the black market and the big drug dealers? People think that, in fact, it will enhance opportunities for the drug dealers since they can always undercut the legal sellers.
Well, market forces are market forces, and in any kind of business, you are going to have competition. To me, I mean, if you were to take that argument a bit further, you'd probably say that a great opportunity exists for the farmers, which is a very productive exercise, because they would be doing it at the source. They would have the cheapest possible cost and can get into distribution. So who else would have a better opportunity than farmers themselves? And if it takes some of the drug dealers into farming, and the farming produces a bumper crop, and that bumper crops produce an opportunity for exporting, I think it's a net win. I don't know that when alcohol was legalized, it created the same kind of criminal activity around it. I think the fact that it's regulated, the fact that it becomes not illegal, eliminates to a great extent the criminal element out of it. And a huge section of the criminal element in drugs in Belize, I don't think is as associated with the domestic trade. I think it's associated with the international trade. And the transit trade, and for more serious drugs like cocaine. So I think that we have to, when we make broad statements, we have to break it down into its elements and discuss those elements. It's too easy to make generalized statements. And I think we have to look at everything in its individual focus. Will there still be certain elements of illegality in legalizing marijuana? I think so. I think it exists in the tomatoes. As
with alcohol, legalization, because some people don't realize that there was a time when alcohol was illegal.
Prohibition?
Yes, in the prohibition period. And there were huge networks of illegal trafficking in alcohol that took place. And so people don't realize that. And if we were to make it legal the way alcohol is legal, it's not a free-for-all. And there are rules and regulations that guide, almost every industry. And it would there would have to be reasonable,
you have the illegal importation of many agricultural products to this country. So the fact that but it's not necessarily done by organized criminals in that kind of context. And I don't think it has created the level of tragedy on human lives. And I think what you will find over time is that what happened. The question that was asked of the general population relative to what has happened since decriminalization, and I was actually surprised that it was since 2017. But we're talking about 4 years since the decriminalization. I don't know that anybody has seen any material criminal activity or other incidences that have occurred as a result of it in the 4-year period. And if they have, I certainly would love to see that data, because I'd hate to just be presumptuous to think that the fact that I haven't heard it means it doesn't exist. And I think it would be an interesting exercise.
Yes, it would be. Yes, it would be. Viewers, we will pause for our first ad break, and when we return, we will be discussing what do we mean when we say legalize marijuana and the potential economic benefits. Be right back. Good night and welcome back to The Conversation. I am your host, Carla Barnett. Tonight, we are discussing that big question of whether or not Belize should legalize marijuana for medicinal and recreational use. I am talking with Doug Singh, former Minister of Police and a champion for the decriminalization of small quantities of marijuana. Doug, let's switch to the economics of legalization. Before we get into the details about the economics, though, let me first ask a key question. what would legalization of marijuana actually look like? What do you think? What do you think it would mean? Would it mean that everybody can grow weed in their backyard? Will everybody be able to sell it? Please, what do you think? What's happened in other places, and what could conceivably be contained in that?
Well, there are at least two elements to it. The recreational use was pretty much opened up in many states for medicinal purposes and for recreational purposes. That's separate from production.
Right.
What most places did was allow for licensing of growing.
Right.
In an effort to regulate it, regulate quality, regulate the fact that chemicals and things that can be harmful for people to ingest.
Right.
You mentioned a bit earlier about the Jamaica model. Jamaica had a little bit of a hybrid, recognizing its cultural use of it, and what Jamaica did in its legislation. This is the decriminalization. This is before even leading to legalization, is they allowed for a bit of domestic farming, where they allowed people at home to produce, I think, 3 plants or
I think it's three or
like
5 trees
for personal,
for personal consumption. Yes.
And they recognized that it was probably being done anyway by people in the rural areas and in some interesting closet farming. But what they did is they recognized what it already exists, and you can't roll that back. And they incorporated to recognize the dynamics of the local culture and the local operations.
And the religious use of it as well in the Rastafarian community.
In particular.
Right.
So I have no clue what is being anticipated or facilitated in Belize in this conversation. While I was directly involved in decriminalization, I am not at all involved in the legalization element of it. And so I have no idea what is being proposed in any kind of a context and in what form it will come. Of course, I don't think something like this happens overnight.
No.
So they will have to have that conversation. We'll put on the table and we'll get an idea. Certainly, as one of the persons interviewed, the young man said he wanted to be the face of it. He wanted to be the king of it,
Yes,
But I think beyond that, I think what he's trying to say, or what he is saying directly, is I want to be a part of this. And I think there has to be a way that recognizes that not just big business should benefit from these kind of ventures.
One of the things that we need to be clear about, because a lot of people are not clear about it, decriminalization as it has happened has not been legalizing it in any shape or form. All it means is that if we catch you with 10 grams or less, we won't arrest you.
Correct.
That's what it means. So we will not make a criminal out of you. But if we legalize it, that is a different concept. Then what you are doing becomes something that is legal, and therefore there needs to be a significant conversation about what activities would be legalized, because we've decriminalized the 10 grams or less, but I still can't go and buy, you still can't go and buy, because,
and I can't grow.
And you can't grow, and you can't sell. And therefore, that big question of, well, when you find someone with it, where did they get it from? Who grew it? We don't ask that.
Well, I think you've just hit on the significant distinction between legalization and decriminalization.
Right.
Decriminalization was a social act.
Right.
Was not to create the injustices that occurred.
Right.
Legalization is an economic act.
Absolutely.
And legalization then creates some opportunities. And how do you harness that opportunity to create benefits for everybody within the country?
Right.
Are you just going to end up with a group of farmers working for a big company that then makes the benefit from it? It's not easy necessarily to produce the oil, the CBD oil out of the product with certain types of equipment that might be necessary. Or maybe it might be, I don't know. There are a lot of people who make coconut oil at home. Maybe you may be able to make CBD oil and have your own packaging and labeling.
Let's stick a pen there, though, because we are talking about marijuana and we are talking about hemp. And there's a difference between marijuana that we know about and hemp that we have been talking about, encouraging investment in quote-unquote industrial hemp.
Well, they're two very big. They both create economic opportunities, but differently.
Right.
One of them for a consumption purposes, the other one too, but indirectly. Hemp is an old product that has been used in the textile industries to make garments, to make rope. There are many different products in the world that we use that has a hemp component in it. And because anything in many countries, or most countries, anything with THC content, which is where the drug element
what
comes
makes
from.
you high.
What makes you high exists in both hemp and marijuana, and they fundamentally look the same. The plant looks the same. What distinguishes one from the other is not just what it's used for, but it is the THC content.
The content of it.
And hemp is 0.3, I believe. It's 0.3 or 0.03 content of THC in it is what makes it hemp, and anything above that is considered
classified as, but it's exactly the same plant. And one of the interesting things that I learned along the way is that if you plant the marijuana plant beside the industrial hemp plant, it's eventually both, they pollinate each other and you get marijuana from both.
It's like oranges. You have sour stock orange, you have Valencia sweet oranges.
Exactly.
And they're oranges, but they have different sugar content. And so it's no different when you look at hemp. But the thing is, hemp has always been a lucrative business for countries who allow the growing under special provisions. When we decriminalized marijuana in that piece of legislation, hemp was removed as an illegal product. So it now opens the doors for industrial hemp and for the production. And I believe there are a few businesses that have already applied for licenses for the production of hemp.
There are several licenses, I believe, that have actually been granted. Whether or not or how much of that is actually in production is something I wouldn't know about at this stage. But I know that there have been discussions about significant investments in industrial hemp. One of the difficulties, as I understood it, is that if we want to export the industrial hemp, we have to make sure that the hemp that we export remains below that 0.3 or whatever that magic number is in terms of the THC content. But how do you think Belize can benefit from legalization of marijuana if such a decision was taken?
Well, I think once again, both the social and the economic side of it. On the social side of it, it's going to be a peace of mind for individuals to know that they're not going to be arrested for something. And I think that will free up the additional 5%. Well, maybe because some might be for cocaine, which is we're not talking about. We're not talking about or other forms of drug other than marijuana, but it certainly will free up some of the prison population. But beyond that, there's an economic opportunity. There is something called marijuana tourism. And you have people who go to different and partake of it. Jamaica was looking at trying to lead in the marijuana tourism industry, where people can come, they have places. In Amsterdam, I went to Amsterdam in 1991, and Amsterdam had a soft, they had a soft policy on drugs. It wasn't legal, but they actually had what they call coffee shops.
The coffee shops.
And they brought out the menu, and you can have it in different edibles and so on. And they were doing this, we're talking about 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so, and a lot of people went to Amsterdam for the freedom of experiencing that. And so there are opportunities where tourists will come and people can set up little smoke shops along the side and they can participate and they'll make money. Just like hair braiding or just like anything else. I don't mean to equate it to hair braiding, but it will become as fluid and as transparent.
To become involved.
And so individuals can set up a little shop on the side and make edibles, make candies, make we own wangla, make we own cut up root with THC inside of it.
Fudge.
And yourself, fudge with THC inside of it, powder bun. You know, so it can take what is already a micro-industry and enhance that micro-industry, and that's at that level. Beyond that, though, once I think the rest of the countries countries in the world start viewing it differently, it creates an export opportunity. And so what that does is allow you, if you produce a hybrid product, that is good for the market, for whether it's medicinal or otherwise, you can either process it here, send the raw material for processing. Hopefully we process here because that's where the margins are. And export oil or export something else, then we can become competitive. My concern is that we're so behind the cue ball, way behind it, that by the time we get our act together, developing countries that have been treating it as illegal, like the US and Canada, etc., would have been way far ahead that they're processing it.
They are way ahead, Doug. I had the experience of going to Canada a couple of years ago. And when you enter into the airport, it tells you, you cannot bring cannabis into Canada. And the reason why they have to tell you that is because the international trade is still illegal, but growing and consuming it is pretty legal in Canada. And so You walk out of the airport and you walk in the neighborhoods and you smell it because people are free to consume it on their verandas, you know, and it's pretty open. And so you realize that there are two levels of activities happening here. And similarly in the US, it's legal in some states, but the trade in it is illegal even between states, and certainly the international trade is still illegal in it. So there are a lot of anomalies that need to be sorted out, and that affects what we can and cannot do. So even if we were to talk about legalizing it, then who would we sell it to? How would we deal with the impact on our financial system, for example? Because I'm told that people who sell marijuana products in Colorado, for example, have a difficulty sending their money to California.
Well, I don't know if this will lead into, maybe this is a time for that discussion. The U.S. government, the House of Representatives just yesterday or a couple days ago passed the banking legislation now that creates an enabling environment for the banks in the U.S. To start taking currency because it's still while states legalized it, the federal government in the U.S. still had it as an illegal activity.
Yes.
It's still illegal, but it created a problem. What it did is the people who operated in it ending up in a cash society.
Cash surplus and can't do anything.
They can't take it to the banks, and also then promotes risk for them, criminal activities where they could be targeted, robbed, and all that kind of stuff. And so we end up in a situation where you cannot bank. So the U.S. it's now been passed by 3-1, if I'm not mistaken, 300 and something members of the House of Representatives approved versus 101 or so that did not. And it's going to the Senate, and I think they're trying to get it done before April 20th. So once the Senate does and is signed by President Biden, it will now give the bank, it creates an enabling environment for the bank to now accept proceeds. Now that has been a barrier.
That's very interesting because that changes the perspective. Yeah, it changes the conversation immediately. I believe sometime in December, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a law that pretty much legalized it at the federal level, but then it had to go to the Senate, and it didn't. So that issue of legalizing the use of it federally has not been sorted out either.
But what it will do, even in Belize, these are the type of things that have to be looked at.
Absolutely.
Because if it is an illegal, once it becomes legal, even if the banks start taking the proceeds, our banks are subject to pressures from international banking.
Absolutely.
And so if the correspondent bank is in an environment that does not condone it and it's an illegal activity.
It's an illegal activity there.
Just like gaming, just like gambling. In Las Vegas, it's legal. In Nevada, it's legal, but it's not legal in certain states in the U.S. So you cannot take those proceeds and bank it in other states. Now, similarly in Belize, we may have an environment where marijuana becomes legal, but the proceeds from it, we may not be able to deposit it in the banking system. Because the banks might be under pressure from their correspondent bank not to accept it, or they will sever that relationship. So this is it's a large topic. It's a large conversation. You know,
it absolutely is, and what we have to recognize is that the conversation is slowly shifting from the right to the left, meaning that it's moving more towards legalizing it internationally. Since legalization should open opportunities for all, how will it benefit the small man if it would be legalized? As it stands now, we know that there are a lot of small sellers in different neighborhoods. Will they be able to participate in the legal market?
I think I alluded to that relative to the type of businesses such as edibles, such as the tourism, the local tourism market, production of oils that might be able to, you might have cooperatives. Just like you do with the banana, banana is not a good example. It's only big players there.
Beekeeping
like
was
the
a big one in the
where
north.
everybody can produce the oils and then they can put the oils together and export the oil. But they may not be able to do it individually, but may be able to do it as a corporation. And so I think there are opportunities. In my mind, I think there has to be an advocate group that if and when this is looked at for legalization, that whatever is done in the legislation does not create barriers that stops people from, small people from benefiting from it.
Right.
You know?
If we can be honest about it, though, we tend to fall on enforcement of laws in Belize. Are we ready to legislate something like this? Are we ready to put in the right protocols and rules in place and then police it?
I don't know that we may ever be. I don't know when we did decriminalization that we were from a literal standpoint. In fact, to a certain extent, one may argue that decriminalization created a de facto legalization, at least from the standpoint of consumption.
Right.
You know, and maybe, but I don't know that you don't do something because there's a deficiency on the other side.
Okay.
Are we ready to enforce all traffic violations? No, I see the police drive right past people who are violating traffic. So the fact that we may not be absolutely apt to control it in that level, to me, is not a fundamental argument to not do it. We've been doing it in so many different things.
Right, so we make the decision based on information and the risks and benefits and costs and gains.
Absolutely.
All right, from a social and economic point of view.
Yes, absolutely. But I think that's the way of the world. I don't know that any country is really ready for certain things. I mean, we look at what is going on right now, ironically, and I think this touches on what has happened in countries that have legalized, or like in the case of the US states that have. They've gotten to a set of circumstances now where it's about selecting the right employees. It's about, in the processing, they're losing a certain value of the THC or the CB, whatever, cannabinoidal, whatever it is thing. So in the processing, it weakens it. So what they're trying to do is all this technology to keep the processing quality level up.
Right.
And so what they're finding as new businesses is they have growing pains. So to maintain the quality in the processing, they have certain things they have to do. And this is what concerns me about Belize. If Belize is going to legalize and try to do it under the basis of economic opportunities, is you're going to be way behind, because they would have developed technology, they would have developed economies, they would have developed advantages that we don't currently have, and would have gone through all the processes about training the employees. They even talk about the sales force, that if they don't do certain things and train the employees right. So what has happened is the growing pains of any form of business has now permeated the business of producing and selling marijuana in developed countries who have granted license.
And so the developing countries are behind. We are not the only ones that are behind the cue ball. We are way behind. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, Doug, you definitely provided us with a lot of valuable information, and we know that our viewers will be reflecting on this. This is a very difficult question for a lot of people. For some, not so difficult. It's very straightforward. But big decisions have to be made. So thank you so much for stopping by.
I want to thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you too, very much.
And I know I'm not really an expert on the matter. I myself don't participate. It's not a smoker, but you know, and I had said with the decriminalization, I may have actually tried it in celebration, and I still haven't done so. So it looks like 4 years have gone by without. Since it's legal, and I would not get into trouble doing so.
I know.
But maybe
but
someday.
there really are big decisions that have to be made, and the discussion is ongoing. So thank you very much for coming and helping us to have that conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Viewers, we will take a short break and be right back to discuss the impact of marijuana use on our health. Thank you for staying tuned into the conversation. I am Carla Barnett. We are very pleased to be joined now by the Director of the National Drug Abuse Control Council, Mr. Esner Veyos. Welcome to the show, Mr. Veyos.
Good night, Dr. Carla. A pleasure to be with you guys and to share a little bit of our knowledge in terms of the topic that we're discussing today.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us, Mr. Veyos, what is the research showing regarding whether marijuana is a gateway drug? That's often heard. What is a gateway drug?
Well, to start off with, a gateway drug is that substance or any substance, whether it be a legal substance or illegal substance that any individual might use or use at that initial point of consumption, right? Whether it be if you're a 16-year-old who consumes marijuana or any substances, right? And once that substance is within your system, then you will be kind of like, we would term it graduate from one substance to another substance to another substance, right?
All right.
So our data at the National Drug Abuse Control Council, which basically deals with that information that we gathered from our clients that we see through our outreach services at the National Drug Abuse Control Council. So clearly depicts that marijuana is one of those substances that can be considered here in the country as a gateway drug, right? Meaning that specifically between young people are consumers of this substance that would eventually lead them to consume other substance as they go out into their lifetime.
Okay, so the indication is that they may start with marijuana and move on to
Yes.
something else.
Yes.
Okay,
or they would consume marijuana and they would also mix it with other substances like alcohol, even over-the-counter medication and so forth.
Okay. Is marijuana addictive in the sense of being unable to control use of it? What do habitual users experience when they try to stop using marijuana?
Well, I think that anything in excess eventually becomes abusive, right? Because once the chemicals are in your system begins to crave for it, and then you begin to look for it. And once you begin to look for it, and at the point of where you can describe what is, for example, marijuana recreational use, for example, or the abuse of marijuana is when the substance that you're consuming starts to infringe in your day-to-day life, right?
Okay.
Meaning that you begin to not function properly, you begin to do things that are not necessarily your normal way of doing things in life, right? When it comes to marijuana, one of the things that we have noticed specifically here in our country is that a lot of young people and would consume this substance to kind of like suppress their feelings, kind of like to feel at ease and at peace and so forth, right?
Okay.
But one of the things that specifically young people are not realizing is that at the longer run, the more you consume, specifically the consumption of smoked marijuana, would lead you to have other ailments, if you want to say like that, because at the end of the day, you're smoking a substance that has some chemicals that will eventually damage your system, right? So it's very
We're talking about the smoke itself.
It's the smoke itself, right? So that's why it's very important that when we do drug prevention education in our communities, that we provide this information to the general population in terms of giving them the knowledge to know what are the effects of the consumption of marijuana or any other substance.
Or any other substance.
Here in the country of Belize.
Okay, including alcohol, including hard drugs, including all of the things that can be over-counter medication, all of those things.
Yes.
Is there evidence that marijuana causes mental illness?
Well, studies have indicated that the consumption of marijuana, specifically those marijuana that have high content on THC, right, do have an effect on your mental stability, in the sense that they do trigger anxiety, they do trigger mental disorders, they do at certain point also, when you're withdrawing from the consumption of marijuana, they also give you insomnia and so forth. So it's very important again, and I can't stress more the fact that everything in excess will have an effect in your system, whether it be psychological, whether it be physical. Therefore, it is very important that young people in particular make the right decisions in life when it comes to the consumption of marijuana.
Marijuana, and I always say marijuana and alcohol and over the counter and all of the other things that they are faced with
Exactly.
as they move through life. The other thing that we hear all the time is that marijuana is medicinal, that it's used to manage pain for cancer patients, for HIV patients, and that it is sometimes used to assist persons who are doing cancer and HIV treatment to manage the side effects, the terrible side effects that you can get from chemotherapy and antiretroviral drugs sometimes. Does it assist people? Have you heard the people talk about it helping them in deal with those issues?
There have been studies that have been made outside of Belize, specifically in developing countries, that do have a correlation between the effect, the suppression of the pain that are caused by cancer or by HIV/AIDS, right? But one thing that I would really want to point out is that marijuana does not cure cancer. It does not cure HIV/AIDS, right?
Right.
But another thing that I would want to say is that it's not like if they would be giving the HIV patients and the cancer patients marijuana to smoke. Sometimes these people are being given the THC content or the whatever medicinal properties that the marijuana has to these individuals in other different forms, right? Probably through a pill or so forth, right? So because at the end of the day, if these individuals who are cancer patients or HIV patients are consumers of smoked marijuana, eventually they might have at the longer run other effects because
of the smoke.
Of the marijuana.
Right. We've also heard that marijuana calms anxiety or helps with insomnia, that kind of thing. What's the evidence there?
Well, when the individual is going through the process of detoxification and removing the substance from the body, then the studies have shown that that it does cause insomnia, right? And it does affect the individuals in many other ways, right? So it's in principle, the consumption of marijuana and its association with mental illness is very broad, and it really needs to have more studies that needs to be made, so that we would really know what are the true links and what are the true effects that marijuana have in our psychomental abilities.
Right. And I would say that again for the full range of legal and illegal drugs that people consume to change their state of mind, so to speak.
Yes.
Is there any evidence that supports the view that marijuana causes more trouble to society than alcohol or other drugs?
Well, that's something that at least at the National Drug Abuse Control Council, we're very cognizant that more studies need to be done, right?
Okay.
We do understand that there are certain things that might lead individuals to do certain things under the influence of marijuana, but at the end of the day, we need to have more studies, specifically here in the country, to determine what are the effects that marijuana have on our population.
Okay. Have you seen any changes in the number of persons that may reach out to the National Drug Abuse Control Council since the decriminalization of small quantities?
That was one of the things that we had in our minds during the whole process of the decriminalization of marijuana, that it might have created an increase, or it would have created an increase of consumption. But our data since 2017, since the decriminalization of marijuana, we haven't seen a drastic increase. We have seen a number of young people consuming more, yes, but I think it's because of the perception that young people have when it comes to decriminalization of marijuana, because they believe that, oh, it's free, now you can smoke it and so forth. And they fail to realize that at the end of the day, marijuana is still illegal, right?
Right.
So we need to make sure that we send a clear message to our young population in particular, because that's the population that I believe that is more vulnerable when it comes to the consumption of marijuana, that you need to get the facts. You need to be aware of what are the pros and what are the cons when it comes to the consumption of marijuana, and make your own decisions, right? And
make an informed decision.
Informed decision. And if you ever need assistance, then the National Drug Abuse Control Council is there to provide those services that are needed.
Right. Any final words on this topic?
Well, again, I really want to emphasize to young people to really make the right choices in life. At the end of the day, and the reason why I emphasize to young people is because our young people are the future of our country, right? And if we have very healthy, productive young people, then I'm pretty much sure that we'll have a society that would be able to provide more development in one sense or the other, right? Because then we'll have healthy individuals with healthy mind that would contribute to the development of this nation.
Thank you very much, Esner, for that very enlightening discussion. We will now take our final break, and then we will come back and wrap up our show. Welcome back to the final segment of the conversation for tonight. We had a very enlightening conversation as we were able to examine some of the pros and cons related to legalizing marijuana for personal consumption and for cultivation. There are pros that are worth exploring as it relates to law enforcement, and certain demographics in our society has been affected by marijuana laws as they relate to personal consumption. On the health side, though, we cannot dismiss some of the concerns highlighted after scientific research and the geopolitical implications should we venture into introducing a formal marijuana cultivation sector. So, while lighting up a spliff can be as easy as 1, 2, 3, legalizing marijuana in Belize may very well be years away. But for many, I am sure their hopes still remain high. I thank our guests tonight, Doug Singh and Esther Veyos, and all our viewers who tuned in tonight. But with that, our time is up. Remember to join us on Mondays at 7 p.m. for new episodes of The Conversation, right here on CBTV and on Colorblind's Facebook page. Good night and take care of yourselves.